Thank you very much. I was really pleased to hear you talk about the importance of bringing patients into innovation. But just a plea to people here, bring your patients in right at the very beginning of the design process, not at the end. You can save so much time and money if you talk to patients right at the beginning. And there's another question for Neil. What role do patients play within the clinician engineer hub? Do you have a committee, a group, or patient advisors? How does it work?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I agree with what you've said. So I think everything has to happen from the start rather than later. I think what we've done at the moment is, to be honest with you, it's been a battle just to get this concept going. So kind of a lot of resistance and negativity towards it. So you've had to spend time just trying to get that concept. I look at sort of the concept of patients, and we're all patients. I know we sort of say we're the clinicians, the engineers, the patient, participation. I'm not saying that we have the lived experience of every different condition, but we are all patients because we're people, and we don't have. Again, you can visit our sites. We are basically just grateful for anyone that supports us. So all our team is on there, and we're just opening arms to everyone essentially. But I don't have the skill set of basically knowing how to organise committees and governance, and I'm trying to now learn that step. It's taken me a lot, and the team just to get to the stage. But no, absolutely right. I'm more than happy to speak to you afterwards. That's last thing we can push them forward.
Any more questions? Could you stand up and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Neil. I'm a medical student here and I run the Medicine Society. I just have a question for both of you. Thank you so much for your talk. I think you both sort of mentioned sort of brain drain, like talent leaving the NHS and going elsewhere to sort of pursue a non-siloed joint up approach. I was wondering, how can the NHS or the universities keep talent within? What are the incentives for that?
That's a very good point. And you're also called Neil, so we should be. So I think it was kind of, we were having some discussions, I think, I'm not sure if we should say it, but we were discussing about changing the pathways just as a start here, because just realizing, talking to Salted student, realizing that this is what we want. So we have to change the model of the training system. It can't just be that you come in and do your shifts and then you don't know that's going to frustrate you. So we have had some discussions just last week actually about looking at how we can sort of create fellowships where student doctors, alongside their training, let's say if they have 3 days to demonstrate their clinical competency, you then give them 2 days of pay to then do what they need to do as well. We have that experience, you then bring it back to the workplace, we then start developing momentum and talking with the department what you've done. So everyone is constantly learning. So that's something that I think we're looking at the moment actually. The other thing to say is that obviously the training has changed as well. So in my time it used to be time-based. Now it's competency-based. So if you can just tick off your competencies, then you're given more time just to basically do the stuff that you have to.
Can I just say something about that? A couple of things occurred to me. I mean, apart from the friend of mine, fellow Cambridge Angel, who was a surgeon here, and who started up a company in his rooms in the hospital, and then got told to leave, which he then had to choose between the NHS and doing what he was doing, and went off. So he now became a Cambridge Angel. Indeed, I got it on a personal note. My daughter did F1, F2, did a little while with the NHS, and is now starting up another company with her cousin. I've seen this absolutely firsthand. I think it's a huge waste because, apart from just the simple monetary thing of all the training and stuff that goes into somebody like yourself. There's immense amounts of talent and insight and stuff, and the people who are doing this are going to be the people who are the most creative and will contribute. I think we just need to create an environment in which that is possible. Now, I started keeping bees when I was about 16, And when the bees come back with a source of nectar, they do a little waggle dance. Everybody knows about the waggle dance. And the bees then look at where the waggle dance is pointing, and off they go to go and find the source of nectar. Except that 20% of the bees completely ignore that instruction and go off and do other things. Right? Why? I don't know how many of you are kind of the adaptive school of evolutionary biology, but basically, as far as I can see, that has been honed by millions of years of evolution and is a very successful strategy. Why do you not do it yourselves? Google, interestingly, has a 20% free time policy for doing other things. When I was talking to, as I was saying about Lucy's talk last Thursday, she was making exactly the same point from a slightly different, she didn't use the big bee analogy, but basically there is insufficient spare capacity in the NHS for people to experiment and do stuff. You need more slack time. I know it's not the kind of thing that the minister would like to hear, but that's what the truth is. And we need to have a lot more engineers involved and others to provide that scope for free thinking so we can generate those serendipitous events. You need to have those 20% of those bees finding alternative sources of nectar, because if you have a system that's so, this is another chapter in my book, it's called so optimized, something along the lines of optimized for failure. Basically, if you're over-optimized and only focus on one thing, it's a very fragile system and will break.
Just hear it from.
Hi. We work in creating new diagnostics and new treatments for rare diseases and chronic illnesses, life-threatening. And we found that the quality of the creation is multiplied if we involve the patients from the beginning.
Yeah.
And we found that the majority of the time, the clinician, the engineer, and the policy makers think that the patient does not want to be involved or have their own opinions of what someone with cystic fibrosis would be involved in or not. But we found that whenever we involve the patients, that relationship stays. So once the patient and the clinicians in Sweden are involved in a project, that tends to remain because of the results you're getting. In your experience here, when COVID forced engineers and clinicians to work together, when they had no choice to look the other way, did that relationship remain sustainable and productive? That's the question.
You don't know Mohammed Al-Baidi, do you? Mohammed Al-Baidi, you mentioned a particular disease. He's involved in a thing called Patients Know Best, which is exactly, he's addressing that particular disease. No, okay, well, okay, so that's another connection. No, his entire company is based on putting the power with the patients and getting them to self-report, self-diagnose, discuss with the clinicians as an advisor, not as the principal person telling people what to do. Okay, very interesting thing to do. So firstly, that's absolutely correct about the way in which our patients should be involved. And the trouble is, as Leah, you said, we're all patients in the sense we all have our own fixed ideas. It's not that any one patient is going to give you the complete answer, but you need to design around patients. The other one, did it endure? No, it didn't, because very quickly the budgeting process squeezed out all of those things that have been freed up, and so prevented anybody from having the spare time and the freedom to be able to do anything about it. That's all gone, as far as I can see. And part of the system response, potentially, that you see with that reduced productivity is actually the consequences of that. Now, I need to think that one through a bit more, not for this meeting, but it's a very interesting thought.
Sorry, can I butt in? I was involved in the emergency approval of ventilators.
Yep.
I set up the approval procedure for MHRA
Okay.
and ran a few projects, or sat in as the regulatory guy in a few
Yep.
projects. And I can say that when we got told no need for those ventilators, the team stopped.
Yep.
But some of them kept going on ideas as it developed from there
Sure.
to see if they would work or not. So it wasn't 0 or 100. You know, there was some
20%.
100
Were
zeros.
you with the TTP people, or was that something else?
No, I was I was with the regular MHRA. So I used to be.
Oh, okay.
I used to run BSI's notified bodies.
But the response of that is, I mean, some people have gone on and some things have gone on, but the amount of that is now a tiny.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
it's,
I
it's
would
a
say-
back squeak. You're
Yeah,
going to have to
no,
listen very carefully to hear it.
Yes,
Decompose.
because like the TTP one, as I understand it, and not I wasn't directly involved in that one. I was
Yeah.
Cambridge Consultants and others.
Right.
Technically, it didn't have a future in the market, so
No.
it stopped. So
That's
that,
right.
that was, which is what you would
But
expect.
you're right. But there's at least one company that's spun out from that stuff with TTP. Yeah. But it's not having a major effect on the NHS. We haven't had a cultural shift because we don't have the resources. Neil, did you want to respond at all to that? Well, okay, I get the point. I get the point. Right.
Just hear it from the
Hi, my name's Emma. I'm an FYT doctor, and I've also done a PhD in machine learning in healthcare.
Right.
One of the things that you were making me think about when you were talking about the idea of clinicians speaking to engineers, and but also what you were saying. So when I did an internship with Microsoft in the second year of my PhD, what I found was I was sitting in on some of these meetings where you had quite formal collaborations between hospitals and the engineers there. And I was just thinking, like, a lot of this meeting doesn't feel productive because it's hard to see two people that are kind of speaking different languages almost. It's very hard to, it's sort of stage one is bringing people together, but actually, like, it's very hard when you've got doctors that don't really have any background in anything technology, and then you've got like engineers that have never been in a hospital or like seen the environment firsthand. So it's quite a challenge to start from that. And I'm wondering if, like, is the solution just bringing them together, or is it like maybe thinking about a more like reducing some of the barriers to actually kind of learn a little bit more about each other's discipline, or I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I can just.
Go on, you go
So,
first. And then
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'd like to know more about the time and discussing all this. I think it's not just obviously just putting people in the room and hoping for the best. I think you've raised an issue around communication, so definitely we speak different languages, so people in healthcare speak in so.
Louder, yeah.
Oh, people in healthcare, they speak in a certain way, and engineers, they speak in their language. But I think that doesn't mean that that's a barrier. I think you just have to spend that time. Over time, you'll realize that those barriers are broken. So maybe you'll just have to take my word for it. But literally was focusing on the communication, realizing that is difficult, and accepting that that is difficult. That doesn't mean, it's a limitation. I think to then answer your other part about, understanding each other, what they do, one of the things that, we're trying to work on is can we allow engineers to spend their, time with us in the clinic. And again, it's sort of, they've never done it before, not time around. And then just see over 6-12 months, are they picking up some medical knowledge, and are the medics and the allied healthcare professionals then understanding the engineering sort of aspects as well. And we have to try, because if we don't try, we're not going to know. So I think there's some value in that.
So I'm going to tackle this from a slightly different point of view. I'm going to quote Karl Marx. Marx talks about the idea of politics and economics being two sides of the same coin. And basically, if you have two large organizations, one being Microsoft and one being the NHS, I'm not surprised that you're going to have meetings between them that are going to be largely performative. And that for me is no surprise at all. I am not a great fan of large organisations and great big slabs of silos and all those kinds of things. I don't think they get very far. They talk a good talk, but a lot of it is cargo cult, right? It's basically performative. And I suspect that's what you saw. You saw people talking to each other, a bit of grandstanding, right, about not really interested in the ideas, right? And whilst I appreciate your diagnosis that the engineers don't understand the medic and the medic don't understand the engineering, but all of you are very intelligent people. You don't need to have this spoon fed to you. It's more an attitude of mind and a behaviour. And that's where I would address it. And I would not go for Palantir or Google or Microsoft, because basically they are coming at this with the same kind of corporate baggage that the NHS comes at it, right? You need to think in a rather more networked, atomistic way about how we're going to do this. And intelligent people, and we've got enough of them in Cambridge, from all disciplines, I think are good enough to be able to tackle this. Whilst you may need a bit of a primer, and I'm sure for an engineer who's never really experienced what it's like being on the front line in A&E, it's going to be a bit of a shock to actually see how things really work. Nevertheless, with a little bit of that, I would say the bigger problem is the behavioural and the cultural one. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Cindy. They said America innovate, China replicate, Europe regulate. So I'm just wondering whether that sort of attitude is deep rooted in the society here. I wonder whether it will take another young generation of clinicians to actually accept the fact that they should be open-minded to innovation, to adaptation, to conversation between clinician and engineer to actually change the landscape. I wonder whether we have to wait for the young generation to break our current hierarchy system, decision-making, policy-making situation.
Yeah, yes, you probably do. I think these things are, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a generational thing. I think that's quite right. And for those of anybody in this room who really just thinks that China is a follower these days has completely missed the point of what's happened in the last 10 years. But let's put that to one side. The issue here is that we need to take your point really about the training and what the interventions that you might want to do. We have to hit the medical schools. We have to do stuff early on. You have to do stuff where students are exposed to the engineering stuff, and the engineers need to be mixing up with the medical schools early on. How can I put this? I don't want to go to a doctor who's going to innovate on me. So there's a kind of conflict of interest here, or I can see the reason why the medical profession operates the way that it does, because of the level of risk. It's back to your point about regulating, right? We need to find a way around that, or through it, or whatever else it is, because that will stifle what we're doing. In the 19th century, doctors were innovating like mad and patients were dying like flies. But the thing is that actually the product of that in the long run was more of the 20% of the bees who were off finding new sources of nectar. So we need to find a way through this without putting patients at risk. But at the same time, you're right, we need to change that culture, but it goes all the way through the medical profession. As it then, as a culture and a set of behavioural values is then projected into those medical schools in order to train the next generation.
No, totally right. So I think, well, you were promoting them.
Sorry?
I'll promote mine as well. So it's interesting what you said. So, the data actually has 70%, I don't like to use the terms millennials, but 70% of millennial doctors, they want to innovate, they want to give them the chance, but only 10% of current medical school curricula actually has that embedded, from the day that they arrive in medical school. So most medical schools haven't even understand that process. So actually the clinicians may know, so also have a medical education. This took 10 years. And basically what was happening was we were constantly saying to them that we need to ensure that every aspect is practical, that there's aspects of technology in sort of medical education process. So it's multiple committee meetings, going to the Senate, to all this kind of thing. But we achieved it. So actually, I think on your point of do we need just the younger generation to do it? I think yes, but we have to support them. So I think if they just go it alone, I don't think it would be the right thing. So we have to back them on this. Sorry.
Any more questions? Just Eric from?
Hi, I'm a postdoctoral researcher, trained as an engineer, but working in the biomedical. So like listening to what you guys are saying, it sort of needs to happen on the shop floor.
Yep.
And I agree, because I remember as a postdoc walking into an operating theatre, so I worked in the department of surgery for about 7 years. And I now speak biology, right? This is how I explain to them. I distill human beings down to machines and everything, but it has taken 7 years, and it hasn't been easy. There's no foundation, formation, there's no funding towards it, and if you speak to any truly interdisciplinary scientist, they will tell you it's the hardest path to trek because the MRCs, the BBSRCs won't fund you because you're too technical. The PSRCs won't fund you because you're doing too many squishy things.
Yep.
And then where do you stand? And what is it in terms of policy that we can do, or who can we advocate to, or who can we speak to make that change start?
Well, it would have been Oxidine Liza, but she's stepping down. So it's Ian Campbell who's going to come in and replace her. I think some serious lobbying needs to be done. Having done cross-disciplinary stuff here at the university, and being told basically you won't get a chair established in that because it doesn't fit into any of the disciplines. And any self-respecting academic is going to want to find a 5-star journal that they can publish in so that they can get promoted. So we have a system that actually mitigates against all the things that we've been talking about. Yeah, that's right. The other thing I just want to pick up about that messiness of biological systems. As an engineer, I am only, and I'm no spring chicken, I'm only just beginning to get a glimmer of the orders of magnitude as how much more complex a biological system is than an engineering system. It's a confession that I'm going to make in front of all of you.
I would also do it, even though I've been hands-on in it, and I constantly go.
Yeah.
In chemistry, A plus B usually equals to C. In biology, A plus B could be A, could be B, could be C. Depends on the person, depends on the cell, depends on the
And a whole load of other, other environmental factors, and this mapping of the genome into the phenotype is absolute nonsense, right? So the point that I want to make here is that is correct, and engineers need to be really humble in front of the most complex systems that they will ever have encountered, including the system that is the NHS, which is probably the most complicated that I've seen. But at the same time, engineers come at this with some pretty interesting ways of thinking about problems, right? And I don't want to quote Marx or Hegel twice in the thing, but it is the synthesis in the end that actually makes this work, and that's what we're arguing for. Nobody has the answer to this. We need to find a way of making that synthesis work.
I wonder if part of it is also within the smaller state. We're just looking at CUH and you see in that environment we'll find a small handful of proactive, very human happy training engineers work with us to get that ball rolling.
would be an amazing start, right? I've worked in 2 labs now who have happily taken on the weight of engineer, who has no biological skills per se on paper. And I've been doing this, and I coach myself, and I work with a whole bunch of things.
Right, so I think that nucleation, right, is important. The thing is, we need to find those places where we can concentrate all of this, so we can get a critical mass, so that it can then be self-sustaining. And I think that's what Neil is trying to do. Is that right, Neil?
Absolutely. Been trying for a long time. But yeah, so we are in the innovation sort of committee here in the hospital. So we are having these discussions. You know, every one of you has turned up today, so clearly, you know, we have a workforce, even though we don't use that. We can all actually push the forward. I think it's still fun. But maybe that's the blue side.
No, I agree. It's good. It's not for that initial group of people to push past that initial barrier that seems to be big.
So we're slightly over time, so I'm going to draw it to a close, but invite you to continue chatting in the cafe next door. So there is another event next month with Louise Allen, who's an ophthalmologist at Brooks, who's had a fantastic innovation journey, and it would be great to see you all at this event as well. Can I say thank you to David and thank you to Neil.